Welcome everyone to our podcast. I read your third opinion this morning, and to be honest, I was really excited to hear some of your thoughts you had on, for example, date in Africa. And just a few days ago, I was watching the Kenyan presidential debates that was so much, also focused on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so this time around the third opinion. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So this time around the third opinion was on questioning whether or not we are seeing a resemblance of another Cold War. It might be extreme to call it a Cold War of sorts. Maybe it could be a mild war of sorts, but you must remember that many African countries, when this matter was brought to its on the floor of the United Nations, that's of course the alleged aggression of Russia towards Ukraine. I'm saying alleged because they say otherwise. When this was brought towards the United Nations, many countries, especially on the continent, we did cover this in the third opinion in the first quarter of the year. Many of them just abstained. They just abstained. They did not vote on the matter. And a few actually did call it out as aggression. So fast forward to now, we are seeing the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, making an African tour, which is quite fascinating with the timing and what it could mean for the continent, and at a time where I would say they're facing battles on so many fronts, and it's just a bit of a reflection. I also signed it off with mentioning that we are seeing next week President Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is also having another African tour.
I think today he's in Guinea-Bissau, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. And the timing of these things has you very, very keen on foreign policy. But if you are keen on foreign policy matters and international relations, you will see that maybe there is some lobbying happening on the side. But also a candid reminder, the Guardian newspaper had a very good article, and they did kind of nuance it into reminding many of the readers that the USSR, the Soviet Union at the time, had a hand in helping many independence struggles on the continent. So maybe it is sort of a reminder for the foreign minister to make the trip and just remind many African leaders in a nice way that it's not to forget some of the work that was put in leading up to independence of these countries. Remember, some of these struggles were very, very bloody. So so that is one way to look at it. The other thing was maybe something that's I'm passionate about, the monetary side of things, and how we are seeing the tightening happening for the United States. This is the fourth consecutive rate hike. Just this week it was 0.75%. That is 75 basis points. That is quite steep. But what does that mean for Africans on the continent? So yes, just a brief sum up of what the third opinion was about. Foreign Minister Lavrov is a very busy man. He's quite busy. He's in the news every other day, defending their position, and for him to take time off and show up on a continent that was once revered by a former president as I cannot use those words on this particular broadcast, but for people of this stature to show up on our dear continent at a time like this, when they have a lot on their desk, is a firm reminder what Africa brings to the table in this day and age, and we cannot take it for granted.
No, but that's a cool sum up of what do you call this, on what was discussed on the point that you're touching on the third opinion. Yeah. So I think just carrying on from that, what I wanted to, I mean, well, obviously today's, what do you call this, today's live is about inflation as well as recession and everything else. So I guess maybe our point of departure should be, are we actually in a recession or not yet?
That's a good point of departure. First of all, it would be good to have not a philosophical, but a good categorization of what your traditional economist calls a recession, and that is maybe 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So going from that, with that definition, you would say yes, but again, if you are familiar, which I'm sure you are, with the categorization of growth, it's not particularly. There is a wholesome figure, but there's also a regional categorization of this region is growing by this, Sub-Saharan Africa is this, North Africa and the Middle East is at this rate. And some regions are not in a recession per se. Some regions are still exhibiting some good bounce backs, and it's really a tough spot to find yourself. But sorry, this is a very long answer. Going with the technical definition, some regions, yes, they are in a recession.
Okay, so like I was reading the other day about this brand called How To for Dummies, right? Apparently, it's now like $1 billion brand created because somebody just decided on the idea of, I need you to explain something to me as if I am 5. Therefore, go for dummies, or how to engineering for dummies, or whatever it is for dummies. So if we're going back to economics 101, and then let's do it economics for dummies. What is a recession? In simple terms. In terms that, because obviously you and I, Arnold, we can talk about this topic and go in depth, but to the ordinary person, what really is recession? What does that mean?
Maggie was about to say something. I'm going to address that. Yeah.
I mean, I me brings it out. I think even when we did our podcasts on Monday, somebody reached out and said, okay, what is a recession? Does that mean I need to worry about my job? I need to worry about my incomes? What is it?
The way that you can look at it is, so first of all, we need to go back to GDP, which is a gross domestic product, which we all know what GDP is.
Just a small point. Remember, we're like 5 years old. Because, at the end of the day, I think the economics is on this level, and then the people actually who are impacted are here. So the whole idea is when the IMF chief economist comes out and says, it's going crazy, there is an economic downfall, there is a recession because this and this country is like, what does it mean? For somebody like me who is running a business, so what? For somebody like Duma who is about to catch another flight somewhere else, so what? Should he cancel his flight and save that money? Like, ideally, it's like, what? Okay, where what is even a recession?
It's always good to start at the beginning, and I appreciate you. There are 2 things that we can use to help us unpack this. One is the business cycle. So the business cycle is it's just like a ripple. That's how it moves. There's ups and downs. And this was a big criticism of capitalism at the when you are to read the big 3 economics greatest scholars, right? There are others. There's depending on where you lie, but there is the big 3 that everyone kind of agrees. That is Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and Milton Keynes. And We all know what Marxism is. His idea of the socialist state and socialism and communism. And on the other hand, you do have thinkers like Milton Keynes, who came later on. And at the beginning, you do have Adam Smith. And with his book called The Wealth of Nations, that some people actually argue is only second to the Bible in terms of copies sold. And Wealth of Nations was published in 1776 when the US was getting independence, but I digress. So one of the criticisms it's a movement
Go on.
for economists. It is a big year for economists. So one of the big criticisms that came from Milton Keynes towards capitalism was the cyclical movement of capitalism. So obviously capitalism is about self. I'm going to look out for myself. This is me really trying to break it down. I'm going to look out for myself. I'm going to look out for my profits. And because of that greed and wanting to further me, it produces, there is a lot of productivity and a lot of yield that comes with capitalism because of me. If I do not do this, I do not eat, you know. So case in point, what the West, many Western states have embraced this, and you can see it. So that in itself, some scholars argued, creates a cyclical movement because in this cyclical movement, there is a depression at the bottom. Then there is a boom when it's going up. Then it peaks. Then it starts to go down. As it's going down, that is the recession, right? Then you get to the bottom again, and then this it repeats. So a good example of a depression is the 1930s, the 1929 Great Depression, you know. Now, let's put that aside and go back to GDP, because how then, the question is, how then do you arrive at the conclusion that now we are decreasing or now we are climbing, right? So we know what it is, but how do we quantify that? So that quantification is where we come in with metrics or, okay, again, you said 5-year-old, but with means to have this calculation such as GDP. And GDP is basically gross domestic product. We all know this, where the definition of GDP is simple. It's just a quantification of goods and services produced within the boundaries of a nation. If I am living in Wakanda and I am Wakanda forever, and I'm the president, or T'Challa, I'm going to make sure that I produce as much vibranium as I can, and the receipts or the payments that come from that are the good is sold, and I get to keep those receipts, and that is quantified. Now, it gets complicated because, not complicated, but this particular quantification, to arrive at that figure, there's so many things, because we're not just talking about my household as T'Challa, we're talking about so many other people. We're talking about your enemies up in the north and, you know, people in the center. And then you need to quantify each and everything that they produce. So that brings us to the GDP equation, which I've mentioned this before, is not that hard. There's tougher equations like simultaneous equations or chemistry equations. This one is simple. It is C plus I plus G plus, open brackets, X minus M. The C is consumption. The I is investment. The G is government spending. The X minus M is exports minus imports. So that's how we arrive at the final figure of GDP. There's another way to quantify that. But now we can say that if we put everything in that particular equation, we can arrive at this figure. And when we arrive at that figure and it is negative for 2 quarters, that then is how we arrive at a recession. If it is positive, then the economy is growing. If it is negative for 1 quarter, okay. If it is negative for 2 quarters, that is where the bells start ringing.
Dumi, did you get?
So I did, and I think how I would sum it up is it's almost like, well, my understanding from what he's saying is, like there's a chain of events, and it's almost like a line of dominoes. The price of a burger goes up, therefore you stop buying the burger. And when you stop buying the burger, then that means the restaurant is also affected. And that means the person who works at the restaurant is affected because they don't have a salary anymore and they can't pay their rent. And then that, and then it just goes on and on and on. So it's like many interconnected chains throughout, this economy, right? So I guess in sort of tying up from that now, so yes, we now understand what recession is about and what forms it and how it impacts the economy, right? But then we see, I think, probably call it the last 3-4 weeks, every other government has been raising their interest rates. How does that affect, or why are they doing that? To what end? Because all we see is, interest rate has gone up. Okay, and then that just means I'm now paying more for my car, more for food, more for fuel, more for everything. But why do they even need to raise those interest rates to begin with?
So the biggest, one of the challenges, again, that we find ourselves with on a day-to-day is inflation. And inflation is basically, for all intents and purposes, it would be a jump in commodity prices on a day-to-day. It can be caused by numerous things, which can be another conversation for another day. But it can also be caused by simple mismanagement of by the monetary institution, which we can call a central bank or Federal Reserve. So there's two things that we can look at as an example. One, we can say depending on where you sit, arguably the two most evolved central banks in the world are the European Central Bank and the United States Federal Reserve Bank. And again, I say depending on where you stand, because some of the ideas such as inflation targeting or transparency were actually already fronted by some Scandinavian banks. But inflation is one of the nightmares that at times comes with growth. Now, don't get me wrong, inflation is not always bad, because on the other hand, you have some countries like Japan at times that have struggled with the opposite of inflation, which is deflation, for quite a while. So again, when we look at the cyclical movement of that is synonymous with capitalism, it is very prone to adverse effects of price movements or price stability or price instability, for that matter. And this is, for all intents and purposes, the core purpose of a central bank, to always have I love the way the South Africa Reserve Bank puts it on their website. I'm paraphrasing, but they say something, I think it was Tito Mboweni at some point, who said, my core goal is, I'm paraphrasing here, is to protect the rands in the citizens' pockets. He said something like that. And that is a good summation of in lay terms, a good summation of what a central bank actually is meant to do. So in economic terms, that would be price stability. I always make this joke, maybe some of you have heard it before, of how order with cash came up. So at the height of the Second World War, inflation was so high. This is, of course, between 1939 and 1945. Inflation was so high that you could walk into a restaurant and they give you the menu and you say, I want a hamburger. And then they give you one. And by the time you're done eating it, the price has changed. So what they started doing was you order with cash right there. If they say it is 50 Deutschmarks, you pay it right then so that they don't tell you it's now 55 by the time you're done eating it. So, of course, that is a rare case of hyperinflation and, of course, the war. But inflation is a nightmare. And what we saw in the past 2 years, of course, with the COVID-19 crisis, was at times when there's something called the Taylor rule. The Taylor rule is very simple. You do target a particular bracket for inflation. And when you see that inflation, let's say 3 to 6% is the usual band that many African banks, actually central banks, target. So when you see that inflation is getting close to 6%, you're going to tighten and increase interest rates so that for all intents and purposes, there's less money in circulation, and the opposite also applies. And so that's tightening, and when times are hard, let's say COVID-19 is here, like 2020, what you then do is you loosen and make lower interest rates so that there is more money in circulation and it is easier to actually borrow. And we call it easy money because it is cheap. So because it is cheap, people are going to, let's say, borrow more because money is less. And when you borrow, you're going to spend. That takes us back to the GDP equation, where the C is consumption, because you're going to buy a soda, you're going to buy airtime, you're going to buy a new car if you're lavish and not very forward thinking. And that is all spending. But if you're spending on things that are made in the country, that is kickstarting the economy. And think of it like jump-starting it. So we enjoyed the easy money in 2020. Every central bank on the continent, even the US, everyone was, trying so hard to kickstart the economy. And now we need to tighten because inflation has gone up. And the tightening is now increasing the interest rates to a point where we can combat the inflation. I mean, inflation in the US just this month was about 9.1%, which is scary for the US. These are numbers that are synonymous with, let's say, Uganda. So they need to now tighten. And that tightening is, it comes with, there are very many tools that you can use, but one that's very straightforward and widely used is increase the interest rates. And, there's other things like mopping up and repos and reverse repos and all that. But yeah, that's a story for another day.
But I had a friend of mine tell me a few weeks ago, Airbnb hadn't got clients for a couple of months in the summer, which is not a usual thing. If it's in the summer, it's fully booked property. And this for them, it was a question of, I think it's COVID-19 or, Ukraine, Russia. But obviously, it's a recession that we're seeing. But as ordinary people, don't really understand it. So in times like these, as founders, entrepreneurs, as people that in markets, as people that really want to plan, what are things that we really, how would you brace for this?
That's a tough question because there's no textbook answer. I guess the textbook answer is always have. There's something the IMF used to call it. It's more like save for a rainy day. you know. The reason why I say that is, let's say, remember the commodity boom? I think it was around 2013, 2014, around there. Commodities were going up like crazy. Obviously, African countries were laughing to the bank. Receipts were good. And that's the time for you to save. I'm talking about this in an aggregate manner, not on a personal manner, as a household. And as you save for the rainy day, one, you ramp up your reserves. If you had 3 months cover, you ramp up your reserves and get to like 6, 7, and get ready for the rainy day because it's going to come. Remember the cyclical movement. It is inevitable. And that has been a problem for many African countries. Maybe the other thing in the build-up to your question, you did mention the air travel and Airbnbs, and it's so odd what's happening here because many of the headwinds that we are seeing have been not singular headwinds. There's been other things that are coupled with it because of COVID-19. Because this is how you can look at it. Because it's been a spiral of events. Because of COVID-19, air travel was almost, airplanes were literally shut down in 2020 and most part of 2021. After that, they tried to kickstart and get back to doing business. The lucky airlines like Lufthansa, I think got 10 billion US dollars or euros worth of a bailout from the German government. The rest were not so lucky. So the question is, what happened to the flight attendants? What happened to the pilots? What happened to the airport staff? What did they do? They were sitting and they had to adapt. They had bills to pay. They had to adapt. Some went into doing online courses. I don't know what they did. So now you cannot just wake up and say, oh yeah, come back to work. People are going to travel in 2022. It's all business go. Some of them, especially in Europe, are saying, but, I moved on. I figured out my life and, you can't just, it's not, I moved on. So the flights are stranded in Europe because they just have no one to work at the airports. I've heard this from someone who was flying to Europe just the other day. And that labor immobility, which could be another topic of its own, or labor mobility for that purpose now, has created a labor shortage. And we all know what goes into production. You need capital, you need land, you need labor. And now that's a problem that we're facing. But going back to answer your question, how do you brace? Save for a rainy day. I remember, I think it was last year, was it last year? I think it was 2020 when oil futures hit close to, they were in negative territory for oil futures. And this is something I talked to you, Maggie, about the other day. And I was wondering, this was the time for African finance ministers and all that to just stock up on as much as they could, get those features. Because now, guess what? Even here in the U.S., oil got to I think $6.50 in some states, like California, for a gallon, $6. And it's the states. People drive cars that are like 6 liters. So they're lucky; they have strategic reserves. We, on the other hand, we're just sitting back. So save for a rainy day, and always remember the cyclical movement. It might look good now, but
okay, all right. So yeah, I guess that applies both for countries, organizations, as well as individuals, I guess, right?
When you say like tough times, Dumi the other day said, oh, it's like a storm, don't worry. After just a few moments, it will be gone.
Yeah. I mean, it really has you thinking. And as Dumi said, you gotta. It's a storm, and you have to weather the storm. Many of us were alive in 2008. That was crazy. That was really bad. And If you're in the States, people were just walking out. You had a job today, tomorrow you didn't have a job. 2020 was also bad. Many of us have never seen streets empty. You know, here in the States, Walmart was no longer working 24 hours. Who knew that was a possibility? I mean, the running joke is Walmart sells everything. They even sell coffins. Well, they weren't working 24 hours anymore. So, yeah, it's you gotta brace. You gotta brace. This isn't the last recession that there'll ever be. This isn't the depressions are not done. The booms are not done. It's just knowing that this is inevitable. It will happen. Question is, how is it finding you?
Okay, so I think in sort of like summing up, what do you think are now the likely let's say two scenarios that will happen now that we are in this position as a world? What are the likely two scenarios that are going to happen?
So it's obviously the tightening it has happened, and it's going to have an impact on servicing debt for many poor countries. Because the sad truth is, I do not know a single African country that, well, with the exception of, I think, South Africa, Kenya. Yeah, so the biggest challenge is much of this debt is issued in foreign currency. So if it's not issued in dollars, some of them are Eurobonds. And I've said this before, Eurobonds are not necessarily bonds issued in euros. But given the fact that many of us issue, I think they're CFA bonds. I think I need to confirm that. So the mere fact that many of these bonds are issued in, or securities are actually issued in foreign currency, we are no worse than, I don't want to say beggars, but we cannot control the narrative because now that tightening is happening in the USA, interest rates are going up. That means that the US dollar is going to appreciate. It is going to climb. That is a given. And when it climbs, guess what? We sign the dotted line, you know. So whether or not you have to pay, let's say, 20 million US dollars every 6 months, it's going to be 20 million US dollars. But 20 million US dollars in today's money, when the US dollar, let's say, has appreciated, is not 20 million US dollars in the US currency in January, when it was, let's say, lower. So that is a sad truth. And it's going to get really, really tough. I honestly, if it goes into a third quarter, I worry that some countries are going to default. Defaulting might be on the table, especially given the fact that inflation is also still looming, and there's something else called there's always a monetary transition delay. So the ugly truth about monetary policy is you cannot cut interest rates today and expect it to have an effect tomorrow. No, there's always a lag. So, and this has always been a journalist's question. Oh no, the central bank cut interest, the repo rate, you know, how come commercial banks are still having loans that are like at 20%, you know, and they always tell you that, guess what, we borrowed that money too, close to 19%, we're making 1% off. So come back to us in a while when we've borrowed money at a cheaper rate, then we can have this conversation. So I see some defaults happening. And it's going to be hard, especially some countries that are having elections, having election years. It also depends how those elections go, but also how monkeypox plays out. I know there's some cases that are confirmed on the continent. So it's a question that needs one to attend to all the variables, sum them in real good, and see how it might be looking in the near term. Yeah, near to midterm. Yeah.
But you know what's funny is that you see all these things going on, changing. When we bought sugar a year ago, it's different from the price now. But you never realize that economically, it's because the date, inflation, and all of these things put into context.
It all comes down to having such conversations, having such debate, and doing our part as the media space to try and educate the electorate as much as we can, because such questions need to be brought to the floor. Debt restructuring is a course of itself. People sit at the IMF and the World Bank just dealing in debt restructuring. It takes even years to sit down and have a metric that can talk about debt restructuring. Let's not forget, we were forgiven highly indebted poor countries. That program was in 2000, where much of Africa's debt was written to 0%. Uganda right now, as we speak, projections show that it's going to be at close to 52% of GDP in just debt. Let's not talk about the servicing. So you just can't wake up and pull a rabbit out of your hat and say, oh yeah, you constructed SDR, now SGR, standard gauge railway. You owe us a good 58 million left, and you say, oh, no, we're going to restructure. You know, it's not that straightforward. There's theories of entrepreneurship, and one of them that tries to explain why Africa finds itself having so many entrepreneurs and this entrepreneurial spirit is the fact that they're pushed into this particular situation, given the fact that their governments are doing little to nothing to help them thrive. So that's where much of the continent finds itself. A tip that I would have is, you know, it's always, it kind of always makes sense to hedge.
Yeah.
Try so much to just diversify and have instruments that can help you weather a storm when there are headwinds such as the cyclical movement, or you're looking at a depression, or a tightening cycle is on the horizon from a central bank. So if you hedge and then you have some instruments that are particularly protected from, let's say, inflationary pressure, then you can find yourself weathering the storm. One good example is gold. I've always been a big proponent of gold, and I do not mean having a huge billion of gold. The coins, you can get gold coins. I think last I checked, I need to check again how much gold is right now. But gold is a good hedge from inflation. And right now, gold is at 1,763. I think close to 4 years ago, when we were doing CNBC a lot, gold was at 1,200. And anyone who is a proponent of gold, they'll tell you, I love gold because gold is the kryptonite of inflation. Gold, that's why we're seeing Zimbabwe try to fight inflation with a gold coin. So just try to diversify and look out for instruments that counter something else. You just can't go and buy copper and buy tungsten and buy what, so that when there's a commodity dip, you're just washed away, and taken to the, I'm losing my word, yeah.
So I think maybe on top of gold, people must also just maybe, I don't know, consider buying cows, maybe, or goats.
Yeah. You talk to a lot of people, you just listen to a few guys and see, as long as it's not something as wayward as Bitcoin, which is really hard to explain.
I'm going to have to go now. But this was very, 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 extremely useful, my brother. Even I, who understands some of these things, have actually learned some of, some new things. There was someone in the comments who was actually asking for a recording of this whole thing. And at the same time, I was actually thinking, the things that you were saying are like real gold, and there's this newspaper that I'm now writing for, like on a weekly basis. And I was like, maybe I must talk to this guy. I need him to drop some of those bars, and I need to include them in my next article, just bracing people for this recession and the likely defaults that many African countries are going to be.
Yeah, I'm always good, sir. I'm here if you want to chat.
All right, folks. I think we're gonna have to leave it here for today. It's an hour now, right, Maggie? I have to go now.
It's always to have Arnold with us. Arnold, for me, it's always a lesson even doing this with you. So it's always a pleasure to have you join us. And obviously, we're gonna have the recording shared on our Instagram page.
Oh, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, guys. And, good to see you all. I really appreciate it.
And for me, I think we've come to the hour. Thank you so much. I mean, it's always a nice one. And I want to thank everyone that tuned in. Thanks for keeping it mass media and for watching. And send us comments to be able to answer that. Thanks, Arnold. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Have a safe night.